A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada ki Jai. Srila Prabhupada founder Acharya Bhagavati Swami ki Jai. Samaveta Bhakta Vrinda ki Jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. Guru and Sri Gauranga. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 We are reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 9, Chapter 24, which is entitled Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Text 58. Yamaya chestitam pumsa.
Yamaya chestitam pumsa.
Sthiti utpati apyayayahi.
Sthiti utpati apyayayahi.
Anugrahastam nivritte.
Anugrahastam nivritte.
Atmalabhaya chesyate.
Atmalabhaya chesyate.
Yanmaya chestitam pumsa.
Yanmaya chestitam pumsa.
Sthiti utpati apyayaya.
Sthiti utpati apyayahi.
Anugrahastam nivritte.
Anugrahastam nivritte.
Atmalabhaya chesyate.
Atmalabhaya chesyate.
Yanmaya chestitam pumsa.
Yanmaya chestitam pumsa.
Sthiti utpati apyayaya.
Sthiti utpati apyayahi.
Anugrahastam nivritte.
Anugrahastam nivritte.
Atmalabhaya chesyate.
Atmalabhaya chesyate. Yanmaya chestitam pumsa. Yanmaya chestitam pumsa. Sthiti apyayahi. Sthiti apyayahi. Anugrahastam nivritte. Anugrahastam nivritte. Atmalabhaya chesyate. Atmalabhaya chesyate.
Yamaya chestitam pumsa.
Yanmaya chestitam pumsa.
Sthiti apyayahi. Anugrahastam nivritte.
Anugrahastam nivritte.
Atmalabhaya chesyate.
Atmalabhaya chesyate.
Yanmaya chestitam pumsa.
Yanmaya chestitam pumsa.
Sthiti utpatti apyayahi.
Sthiti utpatti apyayahi.
Anugrahastam nivritte.
Anugrahastam nivritte.
Atmalabhaya chesyate.
Atmalabhaya chesyate.
Mataji.
Yanmaya chestitam pumsa.
Yanmaya chestitam pumsa.
Chupachapyayahi.
Anutapyayahi.
Anugrahastam nivritte.
Anugrahastam nivritte.
Atmalabhaya chesyate.
Atmalabhaya chesyate.
Yanmaya chestitam pumsa.
Yanmaya chestitam pumsa.
Sthiti utpatti apyayahi.
Sthiti apyayahi.
Anugrahastam nivritte.
Anugrahastam nivritte.
Atmalabhaya chesyate.
Atmalabhaya chesyate.
Yat,
Yat,
whatever.
whatever.
Maya Chestitam,
Maya Chestitam,
the laws of material nature,
the laws of material nature,
enacted by the Supreme Personality of Godhead,
enacted by the Supreme Personality of Godhead,
Pumsa, of the living entities,
of the living entities,
Sthiti, duration of life,
duration of life,
Utpatti,
Utpatti,
birth,
birth,
Apyayaya,
Apyaya,
annihilation,
annihilation,
He, indeed,
indeed,
Anugraha,
Anugraha,
compassion,
compassion,
Tat Nirvrite,
Tat Nirvrite,
the creation and manifestation
the creation and manifestation
of cosmic energy
of
cosmic energy,
to stop the repetition of birth and death.
to stop the repetition of birth and death.
Atmalabhaya,
Atmanavaya,
thus going home,
thus going home,
back to Godhead.
back to Godhead.
Cha,
Cha,
indeed, Isyate,
Ishyate,
for this purpose, creation is there.
for this purpose, creation.
Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. The Supreme Personality of Godhead acts through His material energy in the creation, maintenance and annihilation of this cosmic manifestation, just to deliver the living entity by His compassion and stop the living entity's birth, death, and duration of materialistic life. Thus, He enables the living being to return home back to Godhead. Please repeat. The Supreme Personality of Godhead
The Supreme Personality of Godhead
acts
acts
through His material energy
through His material energy
in the creation,
in the creation,
maintenance,
maintenance,
and annihilation
Annihilation
of this cosmic manifestation,
of this cosmic manifestation,
just to deliver the living entity
just to deliver the living entity
by His compassion
by His compassion,
and stop the living entity's birth,
and stop the living entity's birth,
death,
death,
and duration of materialistic life.
and duration of the materialistic life.
Thus, He enables the living being to return home,
thus enables the living beings to return home.
and our home is back to Godhead. It's a little bit a long purport, so I will read it in 4 pieces and then discuss a little bit. So purport. Materialistic man sometimes asks why God has created the material world for the suffering of the living entities. The material creation is certainly meant for the suffering of the conditioned souls, who are part of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, as confirmed by the Lord Himself in Bhagavad Gita 15.7. Mamaevam so jiva loke, jiva bhuta sanatana, mana sashtanindriyani, prakriti stani karshati. The living entities, that's the translation of the Bhagavad Gita verse 15.7. The living entities in this conditioned world are my eternal fragmental parts. Due to conditioned life, they are struggling very hard with the 6 senses, which conclude the mind. All the living entities are part and partial of the Supreme Personality of Godhead and are as good as the Lord qualitatively, but quantitatively there is a great difference between them. For the Lord is unlimited, whereas the living entities are limited.
Is it okay or I should adjust it? Can you see the book?
Yeah, it's fine, it's fine. So here in the purport, Sri Prabhupada starts by saying, materialistic man sometimes asks why God has created the material world for the suffering of the living entities. And then he himself answers that. He says, yes, material creation is certainly meant for the suffering of the conditioned soul. Because the living entities in this world, in this material world, they have chosen for this in some way because of wanting to be because they wanted to be somewhat independent of the Lord. So that has been a free choice. They wanted to enjoy independently from the Lord. And the Lord does not interfere with the free will. When we want something strongly, then when we desire something intensely, then the Lord is the fulfiller of these desires. It may be good for us, it may not be good for us, but He will fulfill that desire because He does not want to interfere with our independence. So the material world is a creation in response to our desire to enjoy independently from the Lord. At the same time, it's also, material world is also a place of suffering. But most of the people in this material world, they may not even agree that this is a place of suffering. Because they feel that they are enjoying. They feel that there is plenty of opportunity to enjoy. So, but for the devotees, they have come to the realization that this place is a place of suffering. And in fact, in order to, if we want to become interested in spiritual life, or if we become interested in spiritual life, most of the time is because we understand that this material world is a place of suffering. And we wonder, why should I continue to suffer? And we wonder, what can I do to stop this suffering? And then also, if we have this type of desire to finish the suffering of the material world, then the Lord also provides facilities and provides people who show us the way, who answer our doubts, who answers our questions. So it's a little bit like this material world. In one hand, the Lord fulfills the desire of the living entity to enjoy independently. At the same time, it's also a little bit like a trick, because material world, it's not a joke. It's a place where real suffering is taking place, where the living entity bangs his head, where there is an opportunity to enjoy, but every time we try to enjoy, there is also a reaction for that enjoyment. So that's how the Lord makes his energy work, so that we come back to our senses, and rather than wanting to continue to enjoy, we come to our senses and we come to understand that this is actually a place of suffering. There is a little enjoyment and there is a lot of suffering. Anything you do, there is some enjoyment, yes, but there is proportionally so much more suffering. So, like it is said in that verse of Bhagavad Gita, the living entities in this conditioned world are my eternal fragmental parts. Due to conditioned life, they are struggling very hard with the six senses, which include the mind. Because the mind and the knowledge acquiring senses means the eyes, the ears, the nose, the tongue, the skin, they make us see things and they make us attractive, and the mind makes it in such a way that that there is a desire to act on the things what we see, to act in the enjoyment. But every time we enjoy, there is also suffering behind, or as a result of it, or simultaneously, depending on the situation. There is always action and reaction. There are the three modes of material nature, which make us act in certain ways, depending on our desire. So this is the material world where we are bounced, where we are living it, where we are struggling. But it is also an opportunity for getting out of that miserable condition. So we have both. We have the Lord provides both things. He provides for us to so-called independently enjoy from Him, and at the same time He gives us plenty of lessons to learn if we are in that trapped in that material world. He gives us plenty of opportunities to realize that there is no real enjoyment. So I will read the second part. Thus the Lord possesses unlimited potency for pleasure, and the living entities have a limited pleasure potency. Ananda Mayo Vyasat. Vedanta Sutra 1112. Both the Lord and the living entity, being qualitatively spirit soul, have the tendency for peaceful enjoyment. But when the part of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, unfortunately, the part of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, meaning the living entity, unfortunately wants to enjoy independently without Krishna, he is put into the material world, where he begins his life as Brahma and is gradually degraded to the status of an ant or a worm in stool. It's quite a degradation from Lord Brahma to a worm in the stool. Because there is a lot of time also, a lot of births taking place in between these two extremes. This is called Mana Shastani Indriyani Prakriti Stani Karshati. There is a great struggle for existence because the living entity conditioned by material nature is under nature's full control. Prakrite kriyamanani gunai karmani sarvasha. Because of this limited knowledge, however, the living entity thinks he is enjoying in the material world. Mana shastani indriyani prakriti stani karshati. He is actually under the full control of material nature. But still, he thinks himself independent. Ahankara imudahama kartaham iti manyate. Even when he is elevated by speculative knowledge and tries to merge into the existence of Brahman, the same disease continues. Aruya Krishna Parampadam Tata Patanti Ada. Srimad Bhagavatam 10:32. Even having attained that Parampadam, having merged into the impersonal Brahman, he falls again into the material world. So as a living entity, we are part and parcel of the Lord, and we have minute independence. And that minute independence, unfortunately, can still be misused. And what happens is, if we misuse it, then we come in a situation like this, like we are now. And then again, there is a solution to go out of it. And then Srila Prabhupada outlined this process, how to get most direct out of such a precarious situation. Because who wants to suffer? Only fools. That's why Prabhupada calls them fools and rascals, people who come to the material world and who don't want to realize their real situation and who are struggling, working hard to get some small enjoyment. They are called fools and rascals because even if you show them the road, they don't want to take that path. Even if they are shown, look, this is the way out. This is the situation you're in. This is the way out. They say no. I'm happy. I want to remain. And then of course, they can remain for many, many lifetimes. Until ultimately one day, they also come to realize, by the mercy of the Lord, or by some special situation, they get to realize the way out.
So if one does not have, so Prabhupada says, if one has no love for the lotus feet of the Lord, then he falls down. If one is envious of the Lord, then one falls down. And then gradually we become entangled, and then gradually we have to build up again that what we are meant to do. We are meant to be an eternal servant of the Lord. That's our nature. We can deny our nature, that we can. But our nature is our nature. That's how we, from day one, we are an eternal servant of the Lord. That's our intrinsic nature. And we can deny it. So, no, I'm not a servant, I'm a master. Krishna is my competitor. I'm not a servant, I'm a master. I want to be served by others. All this is possible, but it's against our nature. Our very nature is to be a servant of the Lord. And if we follow that, then the path of Krishna consciousness becomes simple. But because our mind is not so simple, and our polluted intelligence is not so simple, because our intelligence is higher than our mind, so our intelligence is directing the mind. But if our intelligence is polluted, then we think we are right, although we are wrong. And it's not easy to see that we are wrong, because we think we are right. So intelligence is a higher level than the mind. Mind you can sometimes still handle in some way or other, but if the intelligence is polluted, then you go the wrong way. And you're very convinced that you're right by going the wrong way. That means polluted intelligence. And if we want to, independently of the Lord, enjoy, that means our intelligence is polluted. But who will tell us? Nobody can tell us. Because we are full of that concept that we are right. That's why we call it the false ego. Not a real ego. The real ego is that we are eternal servant of the Lord and we act accordingly. And the false ego is that our intelligence is polluted and we are convinced that what we do is right, although it's in the absolute level, it's wrong. I read a little more of the purport. In this way, the conditioned soul undergoes a great struggle for its existence in this material world. And therefore, the Lord, out of compassion for the living entity, appears in this world and instructs him. Thus the Lord says in Bhagavad Gita 4:7, Yada yada idharmasya glanir bhavati bharata abhyuttanam adharmasya tadatmanam srijami aham. Translation: whenever and wherever there is a decline in religious practice, O descendant of Bharat, and a predominant rise of irreligion, at that time I dissent myself. The real Dharma is to surrender unto Krishna. But the rebellious living entity, instead of surrendering to Krishna, engages in adharma, in a struggle for existence to become like Krishna. Therefore, out of compassion, Krishna creates this material world to give the living entity a chance to understand his real position. Bhagavad Gita and similar Vedic literatures are presented so that the living being may understand his relationship with Krishna. Vedaischa sarveraham eva vedya. Bhagavad Gita 15:50. All these Vedic literatures are meant to enable the human being to understand what he is, what his actual position is, and what his relationship is with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. This is called Brahma Jigyasa. Every conditioned soul is struggling, but human life provides the best chance for him to understand his position. Therefore, this verse says, Anugrahastam Nivrite, indicating that the false life of repeated birth and death must be stopped, and the conditioned soul should be educated. So we need to be educated to understand our real position. And then we can look at the situation as it is. And then we can make a just being. Is to be considered a failure unless one inquires about the nature of the Absolute. Ask questions like, why am I suffering? It's a very natural. Where do I come from? Where shall I go after death? These are totally appropriate and normal questions for who is suffering, and he wants to know why and what. And that's why education is important. Meeting realized soul is very important, because he is the transmedium, he is the person who brings that, closes that gap between us who are lost in the three modes of material nature and who are lost in ignorance, and then Krishna, the spiritual world. There is a gap. Material world, spiritual world. So how can we bridge that gap? That is the spiritual master who is bridging that gap, who is guiding us in the darkness, and who elevates us to understand what is our real condition and why this material world was created. Because some people want to say that it's atoms clashing and then something, but that's all nonsense. This is material world is created for a particular goal, to satisfy the desire, the independent desire of the living entity, and at the same time to, as a healing system, to come back to our senses and understand our real relationship with the Lord, and then to never return anymore after that. Once we have realized this material world. So that's why, because in the verse it says that that it's a blessing that thus the Lord enables the living being to return home back to Godhead. And so that's his blessing. This creation of the material world is a blessing because it fulfills the independent desire which the Lord doesn't want to interfere, and at the same time it works as a healing process of our misconception and for those who are positively inquiring about why I'm suffering, what can I do about it, there is a solution. And also at the same time, we are reminded, because we are very, as living entities, we are very weak and forgetful. So we can say the material world is so harsh. Why it has to be so harsh to get to learn the lesson? Because we are very forgetful we easily forget, and then again we want to enjoy independently. So we need to be reminded that enjoying independently is unnatural for a living entity. And that's why this material world is so harsh in one sense. Because we need to be reminded again and again, because we forget again and again. And we fall in the same trap again and again, where we go for a little flimsy enjoyment, and we put that higher than our desire to have a loving relationship with the Lord. So we need to be reminded. So we'll read the last part of the purpose. This is the purpose of the creation. The creation does not arise whimsically, as atheistic men think. Asatyam apratistam te jagat ahur anisparam. Aparataspara sambhutam kim anyat kama haitukam. This is Bhagavad Gita 16.8, and the translation is, they say that this world is unreal, that there is no foundation, and that there is no God in control. It is produced of sex desire, and has no cause other than lust. Atheistic rascals, so Prabhupada continues, atheistic rascals think that there is no God and that the creation has taken place by chance. Just as a man and women meet by chance, and the woman becomes pregnant and gives birth to a child. Actually, however, this is not a fact. The fact is that there is a purpose for this creation, to give the conditioned soul a chance to return to its original consciousness, Krishna consciousness, and then return home back to Godhead and be completely happy in the spiritual world. In the material world, the conditioned soul is given a chance to satisfy its senses. But at the same time, he is informed by Vedic knowledge that this material world is not the actual place for happiness. Janma, Mrityu, Jara, Vyadi, Dukkha, Doshana, Darshana. Bhagavad Gita 39. One must stop the repetition of birth and death. Every human being, therefore, should take advantage of this creation by understanding Krishna and its relationship with Krishna. And in this way, return home back to Godhead. So Srila Prabhupada here, in a few sentences, speaks about this people who want to make the people believe that the world, that there is no God and that there is nobody behind. So he calls them atheistic rascals. Because they have some diploma, then they speak something nicely structured sentences and words, but it doesn't make sense. It's not touching on reality. It's touching on an illusion created by some people, which again then, because if there is no God, no superior, then obviously then the conditioned souls can then be great without anybody being greater. But that's not the reality, that's not the fact. That's just created by some tricky, conditioned, polluted intelligence of some scientists or whatever, give it a nice form and some importance, and then it gets attention by the general people. But it misleads the people. And it is just like it's very beneficial for a devotee to introduce Krishna consciousness to a simple soul. So it is very unbeneficial, it's very bad for scientists to use their intelligence against the Supreme Personality of Godhead. It's very unfortunate, but it's the reality at the same time in this material world. We have demoniac people, and we have saintly people, and we have so many people in between. That's the composition of this world. And everybody is conditioned, but those who are innocent, they can be easily captured to understand the Krishna conscious philosophy. And that's where, we as devotees also, devotees go out on big book distribution and preaching programs. Then we aim at a simple people, to help them, to give them a hint, to give them an understanding of the reality, to give them, let them hear for the first time, in many cases, that we are eternal servants of the Lord, and that it's the right thing to glorify the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And it's the wrong thing to try to compete with Him. So Srila Prabhupada gives here the solution. Every human being, therefore, should take advantage of this creation by understanding Krishna and his relationship with Krishna. And in this way, return home back to Godhead. Our real home is obviously in the spiritual world, and that's why Srila Prabhupada made the name of his magazine, Back to Godhead, because that's the mission. Mission of Krishna consciousness is to help people to go back home back to Godhead. Because that's our real home. This is a very temporary home here. And our real home is the spiritual world, to be with Krishna, our eternal Father. And for that, we are working on developing a loving relationship with the Lord. And that's why we chant His holy name. And we also try to chant with feeling, because our relationship has to ultimately come to a loving relationship. So if you love somebody, then you give your heart to that person. So we also try to give our heart to the chanting of the holy name, because at that time, 2 hours a day or more, we are into a loving relationship with the Lord. So there should also be some feeling. Otherwise it's more mechanical chanting. We should chant with feeling, because we want to work on that relationship with Krishna. So then we also have to put some feeling in that relationship. Because when Bharat Maharaj, after being a pious king for a very long time, very exemplary king, then he retires to intensify his relationship with Krishna. That's why he retired. Because when you are a king, so many distractions, so many people come to you, so many ministers, etc., etc. But then he wanted to withdraw himself and make a conclusive end of this lifetime by going to the forest, eat very simple, live very simple, near a river, in the environment of other sadhus. But then, because that sweet little deer that took birth suddenly, and then the mother left her body, and then Bharat Maharaj developed a feeling for that deer. But then to save the deer from drowning is one thing, but then he took it in his ashram, he fed it, he developed a relationship. When he didn't see the deer, he was in anxiety, like a mother who's in anxiety. Oh, where is my little boy? I didn't see him. I hope he's not in danger. So he developed a feeling for the deer, and then he left his body, and what was in his mind? The deer was in his mind. And then he took birth as a deer. Because he had the advantage, because of all the sacrifices that he had done, that he could remember his previous life when he was a deer, in the body of a deer. But we have to come to the point where we develop feeling in our chanting, in our service, that we do it with our heart, and that we intensify our relationship with Krishna in that way. So I will stop here, and we will comments, questions. I will read one more time the verse. The Supreme Personality of Godhead acts through His material energy in the creation, maintenance, and annihilation of this cosmic manifestation, just to deliver the living entity by His compassion and stop the living entity's birth, death, and duration of materialistic life. Thus, He enables the living entity to return home back to God.
In the purport, the Prabhupada writes that being put into this material world, he begins his life with Brahma. This question comes up sometimes because it's common from it, because if that's the case, really only one living entity enters into the universe in every lifetime of Brahma. The Brahma lives the length of the universe. So, how do we understand that?
I wanted to ask to you, Maharaj. At the same, when I read it, at the same point came up. Of course, living entities take quite a long time, at least for our calculation of time in the material world. So yeah, but yeah, it's a little difficult to understand that everybody who comes down from the spiritual world to the material world, that he first becomes Lord Brahma, who has such a long lifetime, and then gradually goes down to the warm in the stool incarnation, which is the most.
In the fourth canto, Prabhupada seems to contradict that. He says, originally, the living entity is a spiritual being. But when he actually desires to enjoy this material world, he comes down. From this verse, referring to the verse in the fourth canto, 29th chapter, text 4, we can understand that the living entity first accepts the body as is human in form. But gradually, due to his degraded activities, he falls into lower forms of life, into the animal, plant, and aquatic form. The Prabhupada says he first takes birth in the human, not the human.
The creation is so vast. It takes place again and again and again. We can't even take it down for our mind. It's impossible to understand.
So maybe some take birth as Lord Brahma, some take birth as human beings. Yes, please.
I just realized that we know that we have a teeny independence of Krishna to use our free will, and how big is the consequence with this little independence, because we live for thousands of millions of lifetime in this world just because of that teeny independence. So one little grain in the machine can drive us to nonsense for so long.
Yeah.
So it's very subtle and we have to be focused and precise.
Yeah. Thank you for that comment. It's indeed the fact that the tiny independence can give us a lot of trouble. Of course, on the eternity, that time then again in the material world, on eternity is relatively short. For us, it's huge, it's very long, many lifetimes, etc. But then again, on eternity, a level of eternity, it might be a short, relatively short time. Yes, Mother.
This is why Srila Prabhupada says that the problem is that this is one grain of sand. It's like taking us for millions of even in animal form. So he says that you, my disciple, we are not afraid of Maya. Just to make us conscious that at any step we can fall down. There is a danger at any step. And we have to always remember Krishna so that we don't slide again in other lives, other species. Very dangerous. We are in a very precarious situation. Sometimes we think now we have a guru, we are learning, we are safe, but actually it's not the case. there are always remnants of karmas coming, and at every step we have to be so careful not to fall down again.
Thank you for that comment. Yes, so Prabhupada himself was afraid of Maya, but he did make that statement that the problem is that we are not afraid of Maya, and that has consequences. Sometimes we have to make another circle because of that. Yes, Madam.
We were discussing this book with Swami Prabhu and myself last night a little bit. We should hear from last week, just mentioned. So you see a little bit of this purport, or not purport, lecture probably. So just imagine, Pandavas had their wife, Draupadi. She is incarnation of goddess of fortune. And friend Krishna, always protecting them. Still, there are so many dangers. This is the instruction. That because Krishna is protecting you, you cannot expect that you'll be out of danger. Danger you must meet, because then you'll know that the material existence is full of danger. We always remember, we should not be so fool that I am living very comfortably now. No, sir, you are in danger. Do not take this material existence as comfortable any moment. Then you will not be able to make progress in spiritual life. As soon as you think I am very comfortable here, you are then spiritually fallen down. That is Maya. We are always in danger, and we should always think of the lotus feet of Krishna. Then we are safe. Otherwise, very dangerous. We should not be afraid because this place is dangerous. We should always expect danger. But if we are faithful to Krishna, if we simply, I mean to say, expect help from Krishna, Krishna will save you. Danger.
Thank you very much, Maharaj. Prabhupada ki
Jai.
Shri Radha Govinda Bhagavad ki Jai. Shri Bhagavatam ki Jai. Om Premanande.